Hey guys, this is Dave. Sorry for the slightly longer stretch with no videos, at least for myself. I know Axel has kept things up and running, so thank you, Axel, for holding down the fort while I was away on vacation. I had a great time visiting my parents and my brother and some other family members on the other side of the US, but I'm definitely feeling rested, and it's always nice to kind of get back into my routine. So it's been a few months since I've done a dongle review, and originally that was kind of the dominating theme with this channel, right behind IEMs, of course. But then I started getting all kinds of other headphones, DAPs, and desktop stuff in for review. So dongles have had to kind of take a little bit of a backseat, but they're still one of my favorite things to review, because while I do get the occasional higher end or even just ridiculously overpriced dongles in for review, generally they're pretty affordable, and you can achieve pretty impressive levels of power and performance while also getting tons of great features. But without question, one of the most appealing attributes is their portability and their convenience. And Fiio has, at least again in my opinion, they've always been one of those companies that have not only been on the forefront of dongle innovation, but also they just seem to consistently lead the market in terms of value as far as bringing devices to the market that provide both high levels of performance and features at very competitive prices. Not to mention impressive levels of power output considering how small these devices are. So now we have their latest entry into the dongle market, the QX13. So I guess the question is, has Fiio done it again with the QX13? Well, let's find out. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything you get in the box with the QX13. You get a short Type-C cable, a case, and you also get a screen protector. I've already installed the screen protector. And then they've also included this ring that has some adhesive on the back, so you can attach it to the back of your source device, and then the case magnetically attaches to the ring. And that's kind of cool because it eliminates the need for rubber bands or other means of attaching the device. So that's a pretty cool little feature. They have two different variations to choose from. They have this version, which this is the titanium gold version, and this is going to set you back around $279. And then they also have a carbon fiber version, which costs $299. On the right side of the device is a red Type-C dedicated power USB input. On the bottom is the Type-C data input, and then on the left is the desktop mode on-off switch. You then have your 4.4 and 3.5 outputs on the top, and then a large 2-inch color display. And then you have your playback controls and your volume controls also right under the display. Then also, just a quick side note, this device does not have a battery, so it does use the power from whatever device it's plugged into. So it does require host power. Now that said, I didn't really notice excessive battery drain from my phone in standard non-desktop mode compared with some of my other batteryless dongles. So Fiio does seem to have kind of worked the whole power management thing out pretty well in standard mode. And then of course, if you plug this into your PC with this red dedicated power input, then what that's gonna do is it's gonna draw power from your PC instead of your phone or other music source. But what's cool is you do not have to use the USB dedicated Type-C power input on the side if you want to enable desktop mode. That said, if you do engage desktop mode without using the power input and you are relying on the source or the host device for power, then you will likely notice a pretty significant increase in battery drain from your host device. So again, power management does seem to be good in standard mode, but not so great in desktop mode if you're not going to use the dedicated USB power input. So what is desktop mode? Well, what it does is it increases the power output from an already impressive 570 milliwatts up to 900 milliwatts out of the 4.4 balanced output, and then from 250 milliwatts to 310 milliwatts out of the 3.5 output. Now, as far as the UI and software displayed on the 2-inch screen in the front, you're going to find all of your pertinent playback information, the device status, plus you can also access the device settings by long pressing the play button, and then you can scroll through the options using the volume buttons. Options include gain levels, filters, volume levels, brightness, PEQ, themes, and more. Additionally, most of those same settings can also be accessed by using the Fiio Control app. And I personally do prefer the app because it's just a little easier to use in my opinion. However, again, I can certainly appreciate that they included this larger 2-inch display. It definitely does help as far as reading the text and kind of navigating the internal menu. And it just does look really good. Now, as far as the inside, we have an ES9027S Pro DAC chip, and that's combined with 6 Texas Instruments op amps, 2 of which are the OPA 1692 chips for the preamp stage, and the other 4 are the INA 1620s, and that's for the post stage. And then of course it can decode all of your higher bitrate audio codecs like 32-bit PCM and DSD-512. So the QX13 is certainly no slouch in the specifications and features department. But of course, the real question is, how does it sound? Well, let's talk about that. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about power output and drivability. So again, with a 32 ohm load, the QX13 will give you 570 milliwatts of power output in standard mode. So it should have no problem driving most full-size headphones to decent volume levels. And then if you engage desktop mode, that power output increases up to 900 milliwatts. And even with higher impedance sets, like my 300 ohm HD 800S, it did a pretty good job driving even these to pretty high volume levels. And then as far as some other full-size sets that I tested this with, I paired it with the Empyrean 2, the Aria Stealth, LCD3 2022, the Poet 109 Pros, the newer Fiio FT7, and then some mid and entry level stuff like the 105 Silva, the 105 AER, the new Harmonic Dyne Baroque, the Fiio FT3, the Lawans, 99 Classics. And then of course I also tested this with a lot of different IEMs, ranging from higher end sets like the Divas, Monarch MK3, the Cantors, FA19, Hakuyas, down to some mid and entry level sets like the IE600s, Pilgrims, Studio 4s, Aspire 1s, and more. But bottom line is that this can drive just about anything you throw at it. maybe with the exception of some really, really hard to drive full-size sets. So in terms of sheer power output for a dongle, this little thing is pretty standout among the competition, at least again, in terms of just the sheer amount of power that this thing can provide. But of course, the big question is, how does it sound? Well, when I was comparing this with some of my other reference level devices, I don't know if I would call it overly warm, but to me it does seem to have a slight emphasis in the lower mid-range. So it does lean warm for sure, but it doesn't strike me as excessive necessarily, because while my attention does seem to be pulled towards the bottom half of its presentation, I would not say it's overly warm, and I don't really get the impression that the upper half of the presentation lacks energy in any way, because instruments and vocals that land within the mid-range still have good presence, they have good clarity, and I also feel the same way about the treble presentation. Cymbals also have relatively good energy. It has a pretty airy upper treble, and while again, I did feel like my attention was being pulled towards the low mids and the mid bass, I do still feel like there was enough upper mid and treble energy to kind of balance things out for the most part. So I guess when I think of the QX13, it does take on kind of a more natural tonality. And I guess that's probably one of the main characteristics that kind of stood out to me. And I can certainly appreciate that, because it does portray vocals and instruments very, very nicely. And additionally, I also noticed that there wasn't any of that unwanted digital glare or any sharpness in the treble that you can sometimes run into with some of the older Sabre devices. So to me, it sounded like the treble, while it is maybe just a little, maybe on the smoother side, it didn't feel like it was overly smooth, at least not enough to negatively impact detail levels. So you have a little bit of a smoother treble presentation with a more low mid-range centric tonality overall. So I guess for me, while the QX13 did well with pretty much every genre that I tested it with, you can definitely expect it to bring a slightly warmer and more musical flavor to vocals and instruments. And you'll also probably notice that there's a little more energy in kick impact or any other percussive instruments that land in the low mids and mid bass. So in addition to that warmth, you can also expect a little more of a dynamic presentation as well. So again, at the end of the day, while the QX13 isn't necessarily going to provide an ultra linear or hyper detailed presentation, what it is going to give you is what I would still consider to be very good levels of detail and pretty impressive levels of clarity for this price point, albeit a slightly fuller and more dynamic presentation. And as far as its technical performance, when I paired this with IEMs like the Divas, the Hakuyas, Gaias, Cantors, the Monarch MK3, and then also with some of my higher end headphones, for this being a slightly higher priced device, I actually do feel like it produced a very reasonable amount of detail as far as staging and layering. Soundstage width was very good, but it does also give me good forward depth as well. Bottom line though, when I paired the QX13 with some of my higher end sets, while I know I could probably squeeze a little more out of them with some of my reference sources, I have to say I was actually really satisfied with the performance they were giving me when I paired them with the QX13. And generally speaking, I didn't feel like I was missing that much in terms of detail, staging, layering, and just its general technical performance. And then of course, I also tested this for background noise using my 2020 Andromedas, and it was generally quiet. However, I did hear just a small amount of hiss between tracks, but only if there was no music playing. And even during the quieter parts of a song, I didn't really notice it at all. And it was only when I was using, again, my most sensitive IEMs that I even heard anything. So with all of my other IEMs, I heard absolutely no noise at all. But honestly, even if you have extremely sensitive IEMs, I don't really think it should be an issue. unless that's something that just really bugs you. But honestly, I don't really foresee that being an issue for most hobbyists. But anyway, so where does that put the QX13 in terms of its overall value and performance levels when compared with some of the competition? Well, if I'm only looking at this device from a sound quality or sound performance perspective, and if I'm only looking at its detail retrieval capabilities, its resolvability, its transparency, its power output, and I'm simply trying to determine where I feel this lands in terms of its overall sound performance, I would say this would probably come pretty close or be almost comparable to some of my higher end dongles like the Questyle M50i, the Ibasso Nunchaku, but I don't know if I would compare this with the DC Elite or even my M18i. Although of course this does outperform all of those in terms of sheer power output. But the best dongle I've ever heard under $500 is the DC Elite. And yes, that is more expensive. And even though the QX13 does have more power output than the DC Elite, I don't think it can compete in terms of pure sound quality. Because to me, the DC Elite is just more transparent, it's more detailed, resolving, and it's just generally more refined than the QX13. And I kind of feel the same way about the M18i and even the M50i as well, because those are just, again, a little more transparent and they are closer to what I would consider to be linear. Now, that said, this is also priced lower than the M18i and the DC Elite. And while the M50i is a little less expensive and just technically a better sounding device, the QX13 does still best it again in terms of sheer power output and features. And I don't think the QX13 really falls that far behind the M50i in terms of just pure sound performance. So I guess the argument could be made that the extra cost associated with the QX13, I guess it could be justified if you need that extra power output and if you prefer the added features that are not present with the M59. So I guess at the end of the day, the question is the QX13 a good value? Or is its $299 asking price justified? And the thing is, really, those answers are really going to come down to what is most important to you. If you feel like you need that extra power and you like the idea of having a larger color screen and app compatibility, then that price may be justified for you, especially if you have, again, headphones that require or like a little more power. But if you only have IEMs, even higher end IEMs, and even if you have full-size headphones that don't necessarily require a ton of power, but you prioritize sound quality and a more linear presentation over power output and features, then you might be better off just saving a little money and going with something like the Questyle M15i. But again, I should clarify, I do think this sounds very, very good, albeit a little on the warm side in its overall presentation. And I do think its feature set is very good. I just don't know if I can definitively declare the QX13 as being the best option at this price point, although I do think it could be a good option, again, depending on your needs. Anyway, I think that does it for this video. If you are new to the Gazzadio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please like this video, please share this video, please comment on this video. I hope you have an awesome day.